I don't know, it seems to me that most people don't even remember who Descartes was.
I'm sorry, I guess I just don't follow you.
But I'd like to.
You could just break it down into 30-second media bites, that's more what he's used to.
Very funny.
All right, what is it that I don't recognize?
What's so bad about Descartes?
There's nothing bad about Descartes. In fact, I think Descartes is wonderful. He was a godsend to the 17th century. But times have changed since then. We need a new way of understanding life. That pendulum, for example, has long since been replaced by a tiny quartz crystal. And these magnificent hand-forged wheels turned into a microchip the size of my thumbnail. That's how far modern science has left mechanistic thinking behind. But you politicians, you seem to have that clockwork still ticking in your head.
It's a fun movie. I don't know why it wasn't such a big smash hit. You know, it had 3 great actors. And they're talking about science the whole hour and a half or whatever. Should have been quite a big hit. But it's free on the internet, so if you get a chance. It's based on a book called The Turning Point. And I can never remember the scientist's name who wrote The Turning Point. It takes me about 5 minutes. And his son was the director of the movie. Friedhof Capra. Friedhof Capra was the author of the book, The Turning Point. I think it's The Turning Point. Turning something. So yes, Turning Point. But it's just a neat way to introduce Descartes, thinking about the mechanistic thinking. And notice that even though they don't talk about Hobbes, Hobbes is doing the same thing. So they're both contemporaries. Notice neither Descartes nor Hobbes are priests. So that's kind of part of this modern era as well, that both of them are students studying, taught by priests, Jesuits, on the part of Descartes, and a monastery of monks taught Hobbes in England. In Malmesbury. If I can find that. And it's a garden now. What's left of it. So Benedictine. But so it's actually kind of funny now. The most famous thing that they have there now is they have an annual Hobbes dinner where a philosopher of note is invited to give the keynote speech. And they also vote on who is their Hobbes character for the year. That's kind of fun. So they're into Hobbes. But one of the main things that tourists go there to see is the Naked Gardeners, because they have a garden on the old Abbey site that's run by an old couple that believe in gardening in the nude. So if you go visit the gardens, which are beautifully kept, at least they were, I don't know if they still are, you might get a chance to meet the gardeners who are in their probably 70s or 80s now, but they still prefer not to wear clothing while they're working. Just fun. But in any case, Hobbes, so they both get monastic or Jesuit, at least. It wasn't a monastery for Descartes, it was a school. But in any case, they're educated by the priests. They're familiar with the theology. It's all important. But at the same time, notice that they have no inclination to become clerics themselves. So instead, what we've got is a new era where educated people are not necessarily part of the church, at least officially. But so the big difference between them, though, is Descartes has this mind-body dualism that you've got a somehow spiritual interconnection between the body and whatever it is that the consciousness is. And this plays a role even in Descartes' arguments. When I mentioned that he was at a gathering in Paris, and one of the things that bothered people was the lack of a strong foundation for knowledge at the time, because lots of people had doubts and so on. Descartes made the comment to, I think, Cardinal Richelieu, I don't know who it was, that he could establish a firm foundation for knowledge, and they said, well, do it. So he began to work on his method. And so what you end up with is, let's do this. I'll go here. Descartes method. Not sure if I'm going to find it. And in fact, if you're, how many folks know the famous line, I think, therefore, everybody knows it? Yes, I am, right? So this is associated with Descartes. The way we could trace it back even further to Augustine. But if we go back to Augustine, St. Augustine, reply to the skeptics. So St. Augustine, and realize this must be 400 AD. So we're looking at 1200 years before Descartes. And Jesuits would have taught Augustine to their pupils. And so Descartes clearly was familiar with the reply to the skeptics from St. Augustine, who within a paragraph basically replied to how we know things for sure. And the question is, if I'm doubting that I exist, I have to say, well, of course I have to exist, because otherwise, who is it that's doubting that I exist? So obviously I exist. In fact, Augustine then goes on to say there's 3 things I know for sure. 1 is that I exist. 2, that I know that I exist. And 3, that I love knowing that I exist. And he actually ties that into the Trinity. So, if you think about, what kind of reflection of the divine does the human being have, it's the idea that we know that we know, and we love knowing, right? So those are the 3 things that Augustine connects. So there's a whole bit in Augustine that Descartes clearly was familiar with. But Descartes famously takes that and in his discourse on the method, which let me. Discourse on the method, the correct method of doing science or right thinking. So this is really the beginning of modern thought, in the sense that you've got a mathematical mind saying that the right way to understand things is using mathematics and mathematical methods, like the elements by Euclid, for example, right? I think we talked about Euclid had a book called The Elements, where he said a point is that which has no parts, a line is a series of points, the ends of a line are points, a shape has lines as the sides, etc. So it's all definitions, and then you follow up on the definitions by the axioms that you have about those, and then following that you have propositions which you can demonstrate using the definitions and the axioms, right? Descartes does this in the discourse on the method, and basically introduces this kind of thinking once again. By the way, we say the Renaissance means the rebirth of interest in the Greek learning, and of course this is actually kind of the tail end of the Renaissance. The Renaissance mostly in Italy, but France is certainly affected by it as well. The Baroque period, by the way, is mostly in Northern Europe. Rococo is actually the period in the Southern Europe. Rococo is even more elaborate. Baroque basically is just so much really, decoration, both in structures and buildings and artwork and in music. So when you listen to Baroque music, you've got lots of, stuff, etc. But so this is the new method, and it should be mathematical. But notice it also ties into this firm foundation. I think, therefore I am. So when I doubt, I can't doubt that I exist, says Descartes. So you can't doubt that. And I don't think anyone disagrees with that line of reasoning. I mean, we've got tons of bar jokes about that. You're probably all familiar with those. Descartes sitting at the bar and he says, I don't think, poof, he's gone. Something goofy, right? So I think, therefore I am. Remember if you're at a cocktail party, what'll get you in with the other nerds that are there. I'm sorry if I'm suggesting you become a nerd, but that's actually fun. But in any case, once you are at this party and someone mentions Descartes, you could say, cogito ergo sum. Yes? Doesn't ring a bell? Shucks. So that's just the Latin for I think, therefore I am, right? Cogito is I think. Ergo, we say ergo, we use that as a thus, right, in English. And sum is I am. Sum as es, sum as es is sun. I am, you are, he is, we are, you are, they are, right? It's easier to say in Latin than in sorry. Okay, so I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. So remember that so that you can say it and just knock socks off of people at parties, etc. Because you're clearly a nerd, I suppose. So Descartes gives us a method, but he keeps to the idea that there is a soul or a mind that interacts with this physical body. So both he and Hobbes accept the idea of the body as an old clock, or a clock, a mechanical, what's her name? Bergman? Wasn't that the actress explaining the clock? However, so they both believe that the body is like a clock, and for Hobbes, that's all there is. But for Descartes, he has to at least act as if he believes there's a soul, and so we get the pineal gland, and that leads to this problem of what's called a homunculus. Sitting in the driver's seat. So here you you see the head of a person, and sitting in the driver's seat is a homunculus who is kind of like driving the head. Reminds me if you saw the movie Ready Player One, or read the book, I especially think of the one character who has a big robot. It's all software, but he's driving a robot and fighting against and so he's sitting in the head of this robot and driving it. That's what it reminds me of. But the argument, of course, is what was Descartes thinking? That the soul is somehow like a driver sitting inside the head somehow with, a driving mechanism to move the body and so on. That's dumb, because if you do that, you end up with actually a chain of homunculi, because who's driving that one? There's got to be one in his head, and then there's one in the head, and the head, but the problem is there's no end to this problem of where is the soul, right? Because the soul is not